Hi, and welcome to Freedom Unshackled, the podcast. I'm Roni Mentor, the founder of both Sisters Heal Our Own Wounds and the Freedom Unshackled Coalition. Today, I'm bringing this podcast to you to address an issue of urgent and profound importance: the unchecked violence and systemic abuse suffered by incarcerated women and men in our city, county, and state correctional facilities. It is time to take a stand against the horrors inflicted upon incarcerated people, not only by their peers, but disturbingly by the very security and civilian staff entrusted with their care. The culture within the Department of Corrections is one of corruption, secrecy, and impunity. A culture that cannot be merely reformed. It must be dismantled and rebuilt with humanity and accountability at its core. The recent death of Robert Brooks at Marcy Correctional Facility serves as a tragic reminder of this systemic failure. It is a story that the Department of Corrections and Community Supervision could not sweep under the rug, but it is far from an isolated incident. These beatings, these acts of cruelty and dehumanization are regular occurrences across our facilities, and yet they persist in the shadows, often ignored by those in power. And I want to repeat that, because it is often ignored by those in power, because we have told them, I have told them what is happening, especially in Albion Correctional Facility, to the women. I, a formerly incarcerated person, knows this system intimately. We know the suffering, the fear, and the daily injustices endured by men and women behind bars. We refuse to stay silent any longer, and it is time for Attorney General's office to launch a comprehensive investigation into every correctional facility in the state of New York. Robert Brooks is not just a name. He is the face of countless Black men and women, mothers, fathers, brothers, sisters, and children who have been victimized by this broken system. His death must not be in vain. It must be a turning point. Let us reimagine what Department of Corrections can and should be. We must create a system that prioritizes rehabilitation over retribution, dignity over degradation, and accountability over corruption. I urge you, my formerly incarcerated brothers and sisters, family members, lawmakers who have the power to effect change, to stand with us. Stand with the victims, the survivors, and the families who have suffered for far too long. Say no more to the horrors of our jails and prisons. Say no more to the culture of abuse and impunity. Together we can create a future when justice truly means justice for everyone. Today I am shaken and enraged by the murder of Robert Brooks at Marcy Correctional Facility. This tragedy is just one more horrifying reminder of the unchecked violence that just runs through our correctional system, unchecked. It shook me to my core, but the truth is, I've been sick to my stomach about these atrocities for years. In 1990, I witnessed correctional officers at Groveland Correctional Facility's annex beat a woman bloody in a nurse's office. I never even knew her real name. We called her Freddy Krueger. But I will never forget what I saw. She was beaten because she was HIV positive, and saliva from her mouth accidentally hit a sergeant as she spoke. The nurse stood by, did nothing, and she let it happen. While we, the other women and I at sick call, were terrified. In 2000, at Albion Correctional Facility, during count time, I watched officers brutally stomp a small defenseless woman as they walked into lockup. It wasn't one or two officers, it was several big men against one small woman. I'll never forget the sight of it. Last night alone, I talked to another formerly incarcerated woman who had PTSD from hearing the story of this man beaten to death at Marcy Correctional Facility, and it brought her back to her own brutal beating by the hand of correctional officers. At that same facility in Albion, a civilian worker told me he would shoot me in the head with an arrow upon my release because I didn't want to paint anymore in industry. And in Nassau County Jail, I witnessed officers press their foot on a woman's neck. She screamed that she couldn't breathe until she couldn't scream anymore. Thank God she didn't die. But I watched them drag her. Her name was Diane. These are not isolated incidents. These horrors are commonplace. They are enabled and perpetuated by a culture of impunity that thrives in the shadows of the Department of Corrections and Community Supervision. A culture where officers and staff abuse their power and where incarcerated people are dehumanized and brutalized. Robert Brooks was sentenced for a crime he committed, but he was not sentenced to death. Yet too many women and men in our correctional facilities live under the constant threat of being raped, beaten, or killed. These are not made-up stories. I lived it. I saw it. And I know countless others who lived through the same. It is time for action. Attorney General Tish James must launch unannounced investigations into these facilities. Stop notifying the prisons and jails in advance that you are coming. Speak directly to the women and the men inside, those who have experienced the violence and fear firsthand. And I even beg you, Attorney General Tish James, to speak to those of us who are formerly incarcerated. Let us tell you what's happening to our sisters and brothers on the inside. We as formerly incarcerated people must stand in solidarity with those we left behind because we know what happens in those facilities. We lived it and we need to refuse to let it continue. The culture of corrections cannot be reformed. It must be dismantled and rebuilt. Enough is enough. The lives of incarcerated men and women matter. Their dignity matters. Their humanity matters. And I, for one, am tired of the women being a forgotten population in all of this. The violence and abuse within our correctional and reentry systems extends far beyond the prison walls, impacting individuals and their families from arrest to reentry. No one is safe under the watchful eye of the New York State Department of Corrections and Community Supervision. I speak from personal experience. My parole officer in Albany, New York, was convicted of raping a woman on his caseload, Mr. Toriani. At the time, I had recently been released from parole, but his crime terrified me. One night he showed up unannounced at my apartment while I was still on parole. He knew I was supposed to be in class at Schenectady Community College, but I happened to be home sick. He knocked on the window, and when I stepped outside, he looked visibly shocked to see me. Looking back, my ex-partner and I believe he came to assault her. This is not an isolated incident. From arrest to incarceration to reentry, individuals and their families are too often subjected to violence by those entrusted with their supervision. These systemic abuses are not limited to New York. They are pervasive across the country. Enough is enough. The culture of abuse within the Department of Corrections and Community Supervision must end. We need to take action, demand investigations, unannounced investigations. enforce accountability, and create safeguards that protect the lives and dignity of those under supervision. We are calling on you, our legislators, to be courageous, to stand with us, to demand accountability and justice for those who cannot speak for themselves. The Freedom Unshackled Coalition stands ready to unite with any organization, formerly incarcerated individuals, and the families and friends of incarcerated men and women. We stand with all of you who are ready to fight, to say loudly and clearly, this needs to end. The corrupt and violent culture of corrections is a sickness that has gone on infecting all of us for far too long. Together, we can dismantle the system that perpetrates abuse and dehumanization. Together, we will demand justice, accountability, and transformative change. This fight is all of our fight, because those are our brothers and sisters, our sisters and brothers who are behind those bars. And together, we are going to help them. Have a good evening.